Remember when Donald Trump was president the first time and eventually the Washington Post newspaper started recording the number of times that he lied? By the way, in his inaugural address, it was filled with lies. He said things that just were demonstrably untrue. Well, how do we feel about that? There is a book called A Right to Lie, Presidents, Other Liars, and the First Amendment. The book talks about how the Constitution feels about lying or not lying on behalf of its presidents. And I think the current Supreme Court has muddied the waters further by saying basically, as long as the president is doing something in his official capacity, it is not something he can be prosecuted for. I would imagine lying falls into that category. Anyway, we are being joined by Catherine Ross, professor of law at George Washington University, who has written a book on all of this. Catherine, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure, Joan, and thank you for that nice introduction. Let me just pick up on two of the things you just said. The Washington Post counted up to 30,000 lies during Trump's first administration, and then they said they're just so fast, there's so many, we can't keep up. We're stopping the count. Which is pretty amazing. And then I also just want to clarify for your listeners that the Constitution actually does protect the right to lie. Lies are not outside of the First Amendment for a variety of reasons.
So freedom of speech means freedom to lie?
Freedom to lie for most people, and especially political lies. And the reason for that is that otherwise the government becomes the arbiter of truth, and it decides what topics you can lie about and what is a lie, which would often mean choosing the information that the state wants to put forward. You just think about the difference between what the Biden administration would label a lie or the judges appointed by Democrats and what the Trump administration would label a lie, and the judges, like Judge Cannon, if there were lawsuits over whether something's a lie, then we really are in an Orwellian situation, 1984, as several courts have pointed out in protecting lies. So what the Supreme Court held in 2012, and then I'll get out of this legal deep dive, is that lying without more cannot be penalized or made illegal. And they didn't really give us a lot of guidance, but they said the more might be a direct benefit to the liar or something that unfairly harms the listener. And then we would have to debate what that is. But just because something's a lie, unless you're using it to commit a crime or defraud someone, or defame someone, we've had a lot of big defamation suits coming out of or related to the last election, then it's protected. It has to be tied to some other crime or harm or demonstrable benefit.
That if we made political lies a crime, then it would be up to the government to decide what was truth. So since we are not doing that, and that is not the case, is it up to journalists? Does that make this fall on journalists or regular voters to decide what is truth if they're being fed lies?
That's a great question. Let's start with the press, because traditionally we all got our news. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but they were main sources of news that most Americans shared, whether it was national newspapers, local newspapers, radio shows like yours, television news that wasn't quite so fragmented by political beliefs. There were 3 major networks. Most Americans came home from work earlier than we do today, and they watched the nightly news. And so we had a shared vision of reality most of the time, and we counted on the media to expose lies and to do some deep digging. And now we have a population that largely doesn't believe in the truth, doesn't get their news from similar sources. They're in information silos, as we put it. And the media has really also let us down. It let us down in the last, I would say, 3 elections, particularly in 2016, where they just assumed that Hillary was going to win, and they attacked her, and they took an arm's length view of Trump when there was an awful lot to reveal about him. And even today, they are doing kind of on the one hand, on the other hand, with headlines. Yesterday, some of your listeners, you may have seen Elon Musk made the Nazi salute at a gathering following the official inauguration. And mainstream media is saying, oh, there's some doubt about what was the meaning when he put his right arm out, palm down. Who knows what that means?
Well,
so
those waters were also muddied when the Anti-Defamation League released a statement saying, look, these are really sensitive times. No. Everybody is on edge. We think it was an awkward gesture, but it didn't necessarily look like a Nazi salute to us.
Joan, I'm Jewish, and I'm a supporter of Israel. And I was so shocked and appalled by their statement, I can't even begin to try to imagine what was in their heads.
You're not alone in that. They're getting a lot of pushback.
To me when I saw it. Yeah. No, it's terrible.
So if everybody's allowed to lie, does everybody get to have their own truth?
That's the second part of your question. What about the voters? Are the voters supposed to figure all this out? In Trump's case, the lies come so fast and so flagrantly that even those of us who follow them for a living or, are expected to comment on them, it is really hard to keep up. And then with each one, you would have to actually do some investigation on your own if the newspapers aren't, giving you the information that you need in an easy-to-digest form. That's asking an awful lot of voters. And we have to remember that the average voter, first of all, may be holding 2 or 3 jobs to support their families. They have a lot of, they've got young kids. They've got aging parents. They have houses to take care of. They have dinner to cook. And so when we say to them, well, there are alternative facts, like Kellyanne Conway said right at the beginning of the first Trump administration, and you guys figure out what facts you like, that's really too much for the average voter. And we also have to remember that American voters don't really follow news and politics, except maybe in the very few days or weeks leading up to the election. And they are not well informed. Most of them don't know who their local elected officials are or who their congressman is. And they aren't familiar with the Constitution because we have stopped for the last 10 or 15 years even teaching civics and the Constitution in our public schools. So I don't know how we can expect the average voter to determine what is true or what is real, or even what I like to call, or what we professionally call, verifiable facts. So there are some things that are facts that are measurable and provable. There are other things that are opinions, and those are never true or false. If you take the same facts and you draw a different conclusion from them, that's a different story. And then there are also many ways of skirting the lie or skirting the truth. And Trump is incredibly gifted at doing that. So he likes to use rhetorical devices like some people think. He's not claiming it's true, right? Or I've heard. Or making a false statement and then saying the next day, but I was joking.
Oh, God, that one drives me crazy.
It's horrendous. But if it was, in fact, a joke or satire, then it's not a lie. And some things, and I discuss this in my book, some things are so simply unbelievable that the speaker can get away with it because the definition of a lie in the law is something the speaker knows to be false and intends the listener to believe.
So if you tell a lie that is so big, no reasonable person could be expected to believe it, then you stay on the right side of the law?
That's a defense. You put it exactly right. No reasonable person would believe that. So if you say, I'm going to, a reasonable person who's a voter might have believed that Trump would solve the war in Ukraine on day one or before his inauguration. But others of us might say, that's insane. Who would believe that? A more classical or, a clearer example of that would be it used to be illegal to be a fortune teller in most states. And one of the defenses was, it's just entertainment. What reasonable customer would believe that I could forecast what's going to happen in the future?
It's interesting because what you're talking about now sounds very much like when Alex Jones of the InfoWars was fighting for custody of his kids in court. His lawyer stood up and said that, because his soon-to-be ex-wife was like, look, this guy's nuts. He says all these things that are demonstrably untrue. Sandy Hook was a hoax. This is this. And his lawyer stood up and basically used that argument that no reasonable person would believe that he wasn't giving out news or facts. It was performance art. That's what it was. It was a performance. It was performance art. It was theater. And we know this because no reasonable person could be expected to believe it.
That's a terrific example. And performance art is one of the terms that's being applied to some of the so-called executive orders that Trump signed yesterday afternoon because they are so transparently unconstitutional. So you might say it's because he wants to be a dictator. He doesn't care about the Constitution, and that's part of it. And the other part of it is we're just laying these out as statements that our masses will love them, and we don't really care whether they're legally enforceable or will be overturned by courts. We just want to say we did our best.
Catherine, we need to take a break. I'm talking to Catherine Ross, who's a professor of law at George Washington University. Her book, A Right to Lie, Presidents, Other Liars, and the First Amendment, will be part of what we talk about when we come right back after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I am joined by Professor of Law at George Washington University, Catherine Ross. She's written a book, A Right to Lie, Presidents, Other Liars, and the First Amendment. Okay, how about somebody like me? I'm in the public forum. I'm in the public eye. Do I have a wider latitude to lie in this particular venue where I'm talking on the radio than, say, when I'm sitting in my lawyer's office trying to negotiate some sort of contract?
Interesting framing. You have the same right to lie in your public appearances as you do over the dinner table. I don't know what kind of lies you might tell in trying to negotiate a contract. So I'd advise you not to lie to your lawyer and not to tell lies in negotiation that can be shown to have resulted in an unfair contract, because it might endanger the contract once you get it. But what you don't have a right to do is lie about other people in a way that damages their reputation. And if you're lying about me, you know, I've been on the radio, I've been on TV, I've written a book, but I'm not what we call a public figure, an easily recognizable person. But if someone is a public figure, you have a lot more latitude to lie about them, not intentionally, but there's a different law that applies, in part because we have a right to criticize our public servants. And so this law comes from this court-created doctrine, comes from concern about political debate and giving people a little room at the margins to make mistakes in what they say. And this is one of the things that the Trump people very much want to overturn, because Trump would like to be able to sue everybody for defamation. But he is indisputably a public figure. And there was a recent controversy over what this all means involving George Stephanopoulos and the his network's ABC's decision to settle with Trump, because George Stephanopoulos made a mistake. He said that Trump had been convicted as a sexual offender rapist, where, in fact, a civil jury of his peers had ruled against him in a defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll, who had claimed that he had raped her in Bergdorf's Goodman's in a dressing room, and the jury handed down a huge judgment. And
but as part of that case, the judge established that Donald Trump, had penetrated E. Jean Carroll, not necessarily with his member, but with his fingers. And then later, I believe that same judge said, you know, if you're looking at a legal definition, that looks like rape to me. So I still don't understand where Stephanopoulos went wrong.
He did rape her under New York law. That's what the jury found. And that was a very clear statement. Stephanopoulos should have won had they gone to trial, and that's why I'm using this example. But Trump has scared people, and ABC decided it was better to pay him off. And they threw Stephanopoulos under the bus, and they shouldn't have. But that's the kind of misspeaking or mistake that makes no difference when we're talking about a public figure. And that's why I think it's quite clear that ABC would have won. And when we get into the major media groups, one of the things that goes on when they're deciding whether to settle or whether to fight and defend the First Amendment rights of the media and of all of us to receive the information we need as voters, the aspect of what we were discussing before the break, because we need information to make intelligent decisions, it is, you know, I'm sure that the network was thinking also about what is our access to the White House in this next administration? Do we want to get interviews? And we can be cut off if they're mad at us. So why don't we just write a check? And we have seen the media and many office holders, public servants at all levels hating to Trump before he even took office. And, you know, as Tim Snyder, the Yale historian, has said, don't obey in advance, you know, before you have to. And I am sure he would agree with me in saying, and don't obey ever, because a dictator cannot survive if everyone disobeys. Is that easy to disobey? No. And do you sometimes pick your battles? Do you obey some things and not things that go too far? Sure. We all have lives to live. But it's not just about not obeying in advance before you have to, but when push comes to shove, we all have to decide, what are we willing to do? I'm seeing too many people who are already just kind of throwing up their hands and giving up.
Why is that? And why is it seemingly coming from the people who should have the most power to resist? It was pointed out that 3 of the world's richest men were sitting right there on the dais to see Donald Trump sworn in. The people who seemingly have the most power to resist have been the first to capitulate.
You are absolutely right. And there's so many things in that statement about the 3 richest men. First of all, they were sitting in front of the cabinet. They were sitting in front of elected officials. They have no official position. And they were given these privileged seats. They each gave $1 million to the inaugural fund. Meaningless amount of, it's like, I give $25 to the local firemen. $1 million to these gazillionaires. Yeah. Is another thing. But, President Biden in his farewell address said we're confronting the risk of an oligarchy. And I'm sorry, we're clearly already there. We can go deeper into oligarchy. We can go deeper into autocracy. But we're not just on the way. And that has been clear in the last 48 hours as well. So why do they cave? They cave because they're greedy for money and power. And all of them are in an industry that is scared of government regulation. And they want to curry favor with Trump, who has indicated that he has no regard for the rule of law. And unlike the first administration, the Supreme Court has now given him immunity, or what I prefer to refer to as impunity for his official acts. And he has already threatened to retract broadcast licenses. And one of the executive orders that he signed yesterday involved regulation of social media. And he's promising not to regulate social media, and also through that executive order purported to order the Attorney General to study what the Biden administration and Congress did in the last 4 years trying to regulate social media. Now, there are a lot of constitutional issues about the First Amendment and the relationship to efforts to regulate social media or any other media, but persuasion that it's in the public interest to, for example, publish accurate information about COVID, persuasion is allowed. And we have seen, after Trump was elected, Zuckerberg said, we're no longer going to monitor what's true and false. And on other social media networks, it's being reported that you can no longer search for comments by Democrats, but only by Republicans.
Yeah.
So that's why they didn't
all
just
that,
take
all that free
scared.
speech. All that free speech. Just like somebody sent me a note this morning that information about LGBTQ and AIDS and stuff was being removed.
They were removed before the close of business yesterday.
Yeah.
You know what else is amazing? We've had a lot of conversation about how Spanish-speaking voters were switching to Republicans, and many of them voted for Trump despite his immigration policies. They yesterday removed the Spanish language sites from the White House portal, as well as the information about women's health care and LGBTQ plus items.
Yep, just like he did last time. And remember last time also, they no longer kept logs of who came to the White House. I was getting all of the press stuff under Joe Biden. Joe Biden had a phone call with this person. Here's what they talked about. Kamala Harris had a phone call. Joe Biden met with this group. It was almost too much information. And under Trump, he put a stop to all that. He didn't want anybody to know who was coming to see him, who he was talking to on the phone, or what was being said.
Yeah, no transparency at all.
Yeah. It is going to be a brave new world. Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us today. It is it's an interesting look at what we've got coming our way.
It's almost too much to take in without your brains exploding.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me, Joan.
It is my pleasure. Catherine Ross is a professor of law at George Washington University, and she has written a book called A Right to Lie, Presidents, Other Liars, and the First Amendment. We are going to take a break for news, and we're going to be back with Jill Wine-Banks after this.